It was revealed, took like five people who were coming to the US, took their passports, um, had them all live in the same house, basically had them as indentured servants. They eventually went to the press about being indentured servants. And what does ICE do? What does the United States government and its benevolence do? Well, obviously, it disappears those four people because their visas were expired while they were being held in servitude. There was an ICE raid. This whole thing happened. Later that month, my sister is driving home, goes to another 7-Eleven a town over, and hears "Hello, beautiful," and the same manager is just moved to another 7-Eleven, to a bigger one, in fact. So I guess that gets you a promotion at that place of business. But that was the normal process of ICE was still horrific going into the Bush era. Was still her. This was, I think, 2011, 2009. So this was during Obama's presidency. ICE was still terrible body. People were being disappeared into, etc. Um, Under Trump, that escalated. Hello, everybody. Um, and under Trump, I guess what we have to talk about is in 2020, you had I know them as the Daniel Prude protests, but the George Floyd protests, or every city had their own version of someone who had been killed by the police who protested. And what happened at those protests was a very intensive police escalation and effectively in a lot of cities, cop riots that led to riots that led to this gigantic movement in 2020, the largest spontaneous protest movement in this country, but which was fueled by your friends were beat up by the cops last night, so you show up tonight. There was this constant dynamic there. So now Trump reelected with a Trumpist movement that was purified of all opportunists or people with a strong relationship to reality, comes in and drastically expands ICE, and ICE now seems like an institutionalization of that very cop riot. People are being allowed in with very, very little qualifications. There was several leftist journalists were able to get jobs at ICE. That is the degree that they are not really looking through people's backgrounds. And in Minneapolis, what we see is compared to a normal ICE raid is 10, 20 agents going to a place of business or to a building where are known migrants, but they have such a degree of force that, they do this, they gather up a bunch of people, take them to God knows where, um, but they are really concentrated. And it's generally concentrated in, you know, um, suburban office parks, suburban industrial parks, suburban warehouses, suburban places that not necessarily are basically segregated out to the migrant economy, which is heavily managed by ICE. What we see in Minneapolis is that they have a far more decentralized model that effectively involves driving, seeing individuals who are not white, stopping, asking that person questions, and then if they are not stopped, basically putting that person in the car and disappearing. This is despite the two largest migrant populations in Minneapolis, Somalis and Hmong people, being refugees and people who have been citizens for 30 years. This is really at this point, it is not about citizenship. It is obviously not about citizenship. It is about a white supremacist project that is being manifested by a variety of people of a variety of races all coming together in a beautiful melting pot of slave catching that is America. So that creates a different dynamic. than what you saw in 2020. Because while the police would escalate sometimes irrationally, there was a general rationality that was trying to avoid unnecessarily killing a protester because that would lead to more people coming out the next day. Um, you were protesting about like a horrific, grievous instance of police violence, but you were doing so, uh, and it was just this one case, or it was just like a handful of cases happening in your city. Thousands of people are being, the normal process is a constant period of offense within Minneapolis, which is leading to drastic escalations in operational ability, strategic ability, tactical ability of these groups. You have the development of rapid response networks, sorry, that now goes to the neighborhood level or the street level that is having people standing on corners in negative 20 Celsius degree weather, ready to blow whistles and do domestic terrorism as per our leaders. Domestic terrorism being filming, saying, "Hey, you guys suck," um, whistling, loud noises. They're very sensitive creatures. These fascists. Um, so you have had drastic escalations in operational ability, etc. One of those examples was last week. You had, for the first time in 20 years, if not potentially 80 years, something that could kind of maybe be called a general strike that called itself to some degree a general strike in this country. You had unions signed on to it, you had the organized left signed on to it, and it had a march that looked pretty large. We're not going to know exactly how much actual workplace participation was removed for quite a bit of time. Um, but then the next week, and now I guess I'll start talking about the Rochester experience. But then the next week, a group of Somalian students called a nationwide general strike that now has spread to the discourses of all sorts of cities where in my home in where I live in Rochester, which is hundreds of miles from Minneapolis, every single cafe on Friday was closed or was sorry that they were not closed. Um, which puts us Marxists in a kind of difficult position because a general strike is generally not just that small business owners close their shops for one day and then on Thursday and Saturday, let's make sure to shop extra so that we can like balance it out. That is not, I think, it's one of those, it's a monkey's paw situation where yes, we have finally a mass strike in this country or an awareness of mass strikes, but it means something that is not exactly correct, which is very easy to get frustrated at. It's very easy to um, there are a lot of we're in a moment that is very um, oriented towards like finding something to do about this moment, which is going to lead to a lot of mistakes that I am worried about how much patience people um will have for it, I guess. But at the same time, everybody seems to be aware of the concept of the imperial boomerang. Everybody seems to be aware of the concept of a general strike, even though they think that they just need to post about it long enough times so that we can do it. Um, that is it's an escalation, it's an elevation of millions of people into trying to be some kind of political agents for themselves, which is a very exciting thing. It's just kind of a question of, what are we necessarily going to be able to do with that? Um, I also was brought in here to talk about Marxist Unity Group's Congress. I can like kind of just short I don't need to talk about that. If we're just focused on this, we've kind of had a month where 40 years have happened. Sorry, Bob, but if you could just give some more, I would be happy to talk about anything else.
No, you can talk about, I mean, the title's there, but you've got you can elaborate on whatever you like, Remy.
Okay, thank you. Just Americans tend to give very bounded, far more bounded speeches. Um, so zoom out from that. Zoom out from Minneapolis and zoom out from the particular people. People are trying to find something that they can do with this moment. Um, as I said, ICE operated under Obama as a horrific institution. And Obama deported the most of any president, partially because since Obama, we have started to deputize Mexico as a part of our immigration, as a part of our immigration response and our control of that. In an article that I wrote last year, I kind of analyzed this economy as like what ICE is it's an institution of labor regulation, right? It's something that is controlling this population of people who have no legal rights, but who are at the same time tremendously necessary for huge parts of the U.S. economy. Agriculture is dependent on migrants. Food service is dependent on migrants. Food production is dependent on migrants. Even if you go to Iowa, if you go to places that you wouldn't normally associate with a migrant population, the meat packing districts are almost entirely Central American, Mexican, etc. Um, Partially because Americans are oriented towards a service economy that Trump has now decided is unnecessary because we all need to be moving around sheets and vats of bleach or something. Um, so migrants are tremendously important to the economy, but they're also important for a kind of petty bourgeois uh, class that exists in the US that is kind of defined by its ability to exploit migrant labor. And I'm not just talking about the whole food structure. I'm also talking about a lot of the trades in the United States. You just, if you're getting a bad deal as a citizen tradesman, you can kind of just, and you have a truck, you can kind of just be like, all right, I'm going to take this amount of money and I'm just going to become an employer from being an employee. And that's like a role or it's something that you get to do as parts of the rural and suburban economy in the United States because of the existence of ICE, because of the existence of these policing entities. So it's an institution of labor regulation and of maintaining these separations that is like completely bipartisan. If you look at the Democrats right now, what they're trying to pivot this into is a conversation about training, which is like hilarious, which is very insane to think about. The problem with the Gestapo agents is that they were all freaking amateur morons, you know? That was the issue, not, you know, they couldn't do a 5 kilometer run. Um, Training about, or like that they need body cameras when probably the reason Renee Good was murdered is because there is a call to take, you know, cool videos of us like ICE constantly releases videos that would have caused protest cycles a couple of years ago. That is part of their purpose now, is to release this stuff because it is propaganda for the 25% of this country who decided that they were really excited about police brutality over the course of the last decade. Um, so I don't know. They're trying to pivot us towards these things, which puts which on the one hand it puts us all local activists, many members of DSA, into a tough position because there is in the United States a very broad speaking crisis of legitimacy. It is happening at basically every level. Um, the feeling of late Sovietness is really. I remember when I got my first office job as someone with a master's degree a couple of years ago. And like one of the first days that I went into the office, I went to the back to smoke a cigarette. And I had a coworker who was like, had been there for a couple of years longer than me, who was just smoking a joint. And I was just thinking like, it is very wide, it's like I've not escaped food service. But there is just a crisis of legitimacy that goes down to the level of like disenfranchisement, distaste of professionalism, of striverness, and kind of a perform like on, and then on the other hand, a performative striverness. It's very, very deep. It tends towards, um, it has tended towards, especially during the Biden years, a form of escapism, a form of kind of ignoring the world around you that became less effective after 10/7/2023 and certainly has in the last year. But the problem is that our energy is still going into a void because the National Democrats are just interested in turning this into their their win scenario for this would be that we all protest for a year, realize that it wasn't useful, and then shrug into electing another Democrat in 2 years, which is absolutely a possibility. Um, I would say that as a Marxist, as a member of Marxist Unity Group, I think that we are at a moment that is very primed for propaganda, primed for elevating people's consciousness and like having their understanding of because it's almost that we're in the intellectual environment that birthed Marxism in the first place, right? There are all of these constant crises that are constantly occurring, that are constantly damaging people's belief in the system, belief in the legitimacy of the system, belief in the legitimacy of, going out to the workplace. There is a wide slogan level understanding of the world, but it goes into like if we don't give more than slogans, then that's just going to funnel into moralism, right? Moralism and the response to surface circumstances. Um, it's cool that people are saying abolish ICE, but part of the problem with abolish ICE is then that actually poses the question of political power, right? Who's abolishing ICE? Who's going to prosecute ICE? The Trump administration? Like, no, they're not going to do that. The reality is, if the judiciary and executive agree, then they can do whatever they want in this country. We know this from the Patriot Act. We know this from any number of escalations in executive authority that have happened in the last couple of decades. That it just doesn't ratchet back ever. So that is, I guess, the situation, the political situation we find ourselves in. I would say if you zoom out a further level, though, and Trump seems to be there's like, I would say, among liberals, among the people who are protesting, we're now seeing an exciting combination. Last year, there were the No Kings protests. There were all of these kind of liberal or progressive coded protests that was kind of the return of the pre-2020 protest set. Your families, your older people, your people with very clever signs, those all kind of disappeared in 2020 and especially in 2023. And they kind of protested while a lot of younger people and more radical people were burnt out and feeling kind of cornered. I think that this year I'm seeing both of those groups cooperating in a way that I've not really seen since the Ukraine war, kind of split a wedge between the liberal and socialist left, or activist left, I guess. But there is a conflict over, is Trump a continuity of the American system, and what does that mean? What does it mean to operationalize that knowledge versus the far more tempting Trump is an aberration, Trump is a dictator, Trump is a king. But not, I've heard that they call themselves no tyrants over in the UK because they don't want to be disrespectful to your king, who's great, or whatever. Which is kind of a sign of where they are politically. But I would say that if you zoom out another level, Trump is kind of just internalizing the relationship that all of you have had to the Electoral College since 1953, which is that the US president can murder all of us if he wants to. Like, that has just been the relationship that the president has had with regards to the world since we developed the hydrogen bomb. And in that circumstance, how could you not be an imperial president? So I don't know. I think that the real question for Marxists here is, how do we get people to understand the level of the task, like the scale of the task that they are trying to undertake here? I think that the question of program, the question of what this movement is for, is a question that the US left has been able to shirk for like a couple of generations now, because first the Soviets were telling us what to do, then the Chinese were telling us what to do, and then there was a short period where we started thinking about our own programs, and then anarchists accepted that we didn't have to think about that. For a very long time, we have been responsive to the needs of the anti-imperialist moment, but that has kind of limited our own protagonism and our own understanding of what are we fighting for? What is the end goal here? And I think that it has to be brought to our attention, because 2020 was the largest protest wave in US history, and it ended with the right trying to take power. The right, who had been sitting in their chairs, in the suburbs, grumbling about all these protesters. And the closest thing that we took to taking power was like a 4-area block in Seattle. Nobody had the thought of, let's actually form our own government or something like that. And that's partially because the demand didn't require that we form our own government, or at least we thought it was not. And we have to correct that. There's so much room to breathe in an hour, Comrade Bob. I would love to take questions or something like that. I feel like I've reached the point where I'm just going to start rambling.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Remy. What we usually do, we invite questions, and then after about 3 or 4 questions or contributions, we invite the speaker, in this instance yourself, to come back and answer those particular questions. Is that okay? Okay, all right.
That is okay. Let me grab a pen and paper real quick.
Absolutely. I've got 3 people so far, 2 people. I've got Sasha and Gabby. Gabby, you're already a panelist, so I'm going to
Go ahead, comrades.
I think Bob has frozen.
Yes, just start talking, Gabby.
Oh, me? Oh,
yes, you're next.
I'm used to taking orders, comrade. you can tell by my accent I'm actually American, and I do vote. I vote in New York, so just don't hate me too much. Um, I have a couple of questions for you, and I do read a great deal. I mean, I read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and I get the paper from the CPUSA, and I'm wondering. I've seen very little about any other left organizations and what they are doing in this particular period of crisis. And I wondered if you could say something specifically about the CPUSA, which used to be my home when I was in New York. That's number one. Number two, there was a program on Radio 4, which is one of the more, I'm not quite sure, intellectual, you would put it that way, radio stations in Britain, giving a background to Stephen Miller and his obsession with immigrants, and him as being the spearhead in working with Trump in this whole getting rid of every immigrant thing that's going on in the States. And I know about Marco Rubio because I have been in Cuba quite a number of times, and his obsession with Cuba. And I wondered if what DSA has to say, if anything, about the people who were around Trump, pointing him in the directions in which he's going. And one more, one of our comrades died recently, and I found on Facebook the DSA New York virtual choir singing Beloved Comrade, which we played at his funeral. And I wondered if that was still going, because I haven't found anything else that they've done. And they were absolutely brilliant. So I thought I'd ask you about that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Sasha? Off you go, Sasha.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I've seen very recently lots of the snowstorms coming in, which is quite hard. I also worked in Minnesota, near Baxter, which you may know about. My main questions are really about federalism versus the main state, because lots of Europeans, especially when this country was in the EU, they